we're going to be moving into the next round of sessions, which again are focused on this huge question, right? Is sort of existential question in terms of the role of public funding, individual giving, and institutional philanthropy in strengthening music ecosystems. And again, we're going to look at this from two lenses. We're first going to have a conversation that's looking at sort of the role of foundations and nonprofits. And then we're going to pivot and talk a little bit more about public sector funding in terms of arts agencies, art service orgs, and local governments. I really want to give a huge shout out to everybody who's in this next session, but Stacie Freasier from C3 Catalyst is helping curate this and manage the session. And I know they've put a lot of work into thinking about what they want to talk about today and share with everybody. So again, if you have questions and comments, throw them in the chat as we go. With that, I think I'm ready to turn it over to Stacie. So Stacie, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. And I think we're missing, hi, I think we're missing one leg of our four-legged stool. Ella.
No, Ella was in.
Ta-da! There she is.
I am. Hello.
Awesome.
All right. Thanks, Michael. So I'm joining you from Texas, so I'll say hey, y'all. Thanks for tuning in to the session. The next 45 or so minutes is a discussion around philanthropy and alignment in support of music nonprofits and artists. I'm joined by a humbling group of music community leaders who span the country, who offer complementary and interconnected perspectives into the foundation, nonprofit, and artist worlds. This will be conversational improv jazz. We're going to organize around a few themes, those being vehicles of philanthropic giving, aligning that giving with music organizations and at times artists directly. And in that alignment, raising issues of equity and inclusion to build a better collective future for us all. So I'd like to start with a quick round of self-introductions. My background is in the foundation and nonprofit world. I'm currently a consultant with La Piana Consulting, in which I am focused on strategy and a mixed bag of support services to foundations and direct service nonprofits. And then my individual practice, C3 Catalyst Consulting, centers around coaching and fundraising for music-centric nonprofit orgs. I'm also on the executive committee of the Playing for Change Foundation, a global music nonprofit that focuses on positive social change through music and arts education. And you may see us on Facebook on Giving Tuesday on December 1st. Speaking of philanthropic vehicles, Facebook is our corporate sponsor, and they've given us $300,000 in in-kind marketing. So we're going to be their premier nonprofit of choice on Giving Tuesday. So I hope you'll check that out. So let me pass the mic to Ariel.
Awesome. Yeah, and thank you again, Stacie, for inviting me to be a part of this conversation. I really can't wait for today's chat. Currently, I'm the program manager for the social impact team at the Kennedy Center, where I hope to manage programs geared towards amplifying the work of artists throughout the performing arts sector, with a keen focus on the work that's happening here in our nation's capital. I'm also a member of the Knowledge and Strategy team for the Lewis Prize for Music, an organization that provides financial support for creative youth development music leaders. So these are after school or out of school music programs in the country. We're actually gearing up to announce our second round of finalists for that award. Out of those finalists, they'll be competing for $500,000 in grant support, and 3 of them will obtain that funding. So that's really exciting. I'm also the co-founder and a current board member of the Arts Administrators of Color Network, an organization I helped to establish in 2016, which largely arose due to the inequities that frankly exist within the nonprofit arts world. And I support as an advisor and independent consultant for various organizations and small businesses working for greater representation in arts.
Ella.
Hi. Thanks, Stacie. Hello, everyone. I'm happy to be with you. I was the program director at Cal Performances at the University of California at Berkeley. Then I was the executive and artistic director of Jacob's Pillow. More recently, I was the senior program officer for arts and cultural heritage at the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation in New York. And currently, I'm working independently with cultural organizations, artists, funders, advising them in a lot of ways, curating, fundraising, program development, artistic and career development, helping them to think and plan their way through short and long-term issues and aspirations.
Matt?
Hi, it is a real honor to be here. Thank you so much for inviting all of us and bringing us all together, Stacie. My name is Matt Ott. I'm the co-founder of Black Fret, an aspirationally global organization with chapters in Austin and Seattle that recognizes local music as art. And we believe that as art, it deserves the support of the community. That's why we're all here today. We employ a member-based model that has managed to give out over $2.1 million directly to Austin and Seattle artists in the last 7 years, over $1.5 million to the larger local music economy, production companies, and what have you. And I'm really excited to be here today. I'm a strong believer in a sense of abundance, and to learn from Ariel, Ella, and Stacie and engage in this discussion is going to be a real joy. So thank you for having me.
Sweet. So Ella, I'd like for you to kick us off by asking you, well, first saying you work with a wide range of funders and nonprofits while at Mellon Foundation, and you granted out $65 million annually to arts orgs and initiatives. Can you help us demystify the private foundation world for those who may not have inroads into it, and in doing so, unpack why private philanthropy is a black box for many?
Yeah, I've worked on both sides of the table, as they say. I would take my cue from music on this question. I think philanthropy's role should be as an ensemble player. I think it's symptomatic that the field continues to talk about demystifying private funding. And I'll state the obvious here about the history of private foundations founded on individual wealth. And generally speaking, they take the private part very seriously. So, we inherit embedded ideas and practices about the preservation of capital and exclusivity. And now, at a fraught time when issues around hierarchy and power dynamics, racism, equity, inclusion, distribution of wealth are being fought in the streets and interrogated in boardrooms, ideas and practices around transparency are changing. This is a good thing. Our panel time is brief, and I was asked to be very pragmatic. So I'll say just a few things about access, because I think that's probably the hardest nut of demystification, especially with respect to those private foundations that are by invitation only, where the pearly gates are most sturdy and high. I think some of the most useful demystification practices are in plain sight. I'll mention two, and I'll include some do's and don'ts if you don't mind. The first one is about research. We have to try to avoid wishing or extrapolating our way into the guidelines of the foundation. Read about the grants that the foundation makes, because that's what it actually does. And interpreting sort of eloquent, broad website statements that you can drive a truck through is not as useful. Read their newsletters, listen to their webinars, podcasts, etc. Understand the foundation's priorities, long held and new areas of giving. And also their patterns of giving are very revealing. I also think it's helpful to talk with a current grantee and see if you can actually get the skinny on how they've succeeded. And then sit on the other side of the table and ask yourself if your case holds water in an intensely competitive environment. The other point is about being visible and being active, the active verb, because it takes discipline and consistency to be visible, to take the time to be visible, especially when people feel so invisible. Private foundations curate. I know that's a word that some people really, want to expunge, but I'll just use it for the moment. Private foundations curate their grant making portfolios, and it's a very deliberative and strategic process. And many program officers are very passionate about the field. And like any informed, responsible leader, they have imagination and they're thinking about the effective ways to address challenges with the resources they have available. So, we hear words a lot like, strategic and impact. And we have to really think about what the interpretation of that is in stark reality. Another thing I think is really useful is to serve on panels wherever you can. You will be noticed. You never know who's in the audience. Send your newsletter, a major press release, for example, not every press release, a major press release. Write something for a publication that they read. Attend a conference that funders also attend online presentations by foundation presidents and program officers. Maybe a colleague would make an introduction to them. It does happen. We hear so much about influencers all the time, and maybe all of you out there are influencers. Who else is, and do you know them? I have confidence that cohorts and coalitions really raise the level of visibility, but they must be true ones. And people who are really on task at, program officers of foundations, we all have, a real kind of baloney meter to figure out when things are honest and true, those partnerships and coalitions and so on. I'm going to end with two examples of my work at Mellon that are very much about access and welcoming new organizations and people in, and maybe these will be helpful examples for you. Looking at philanthropy overall and at Mellon's own funding history, there was a noticeable lack of grant making to what's typically called culturally specific organizations. Many had been doing great work for a long time. So I made grants to organizations, for example, the Native American Cultural Center in Anchorage, Ashe in New Orleans, Guadalupe Cultural Center in San Antonio, the Caribbean Cultural Center, the Laundromat Project, both in Harlem, other organizations. And these were first-time grants from Mellon. I think the grants were helpful to the organizations and also raised their level of visibility among other grant makers. So one hopes that that's one of the effects of the grant making, of course. There were several strong music initiatives at Mellon in our arts and culture program, but I noted little attention to jazz. Such an important part of American history, such an important form of music. So I began making grants to organizations, for example, Earshot in Seattle, wonderful organization, and Arturo O'Farrell's organization in New York, for example. And then I partnered, trying to put our dollars together for to maximize impact, with my colleague Maureen Knighton at the Duke Foundation to increase support for jazz. And this was a regional initiative called Jazz Road, and it was administrated by South Arts to help support artist fees and touring throughout the South. At the same time, I submitted a paper to Mellon about potential national funding for jazz so that we could expand that program. And I noted the important role of HBCUs in jazz. So these are a few things to mention, and I hope that's been relevant and useful to someone out there.
That was awesome. Thank you. It was hyper pragmatic. Ella,
Okay.
you stuck the landing there.
You asked me to be pragmatic.
Yeah, and you delivered. You delivered. Ariel, I'm gonna ask you to pick up where she left off, because you, in yesterday's planning conversation, brought up the HBCU Jazz Education Initiative. So run with that a little bit, and whatever else you want to, wise woman.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting because there are so many spaces that I recognize I've been able to step into, largely because of all the great work I know Ella, has contributed to. I worked with an organization where I helped with their grants process. It was the Inner City Youth Orchestra of LA and the LA Chamber Orchestra, and they were funded by the Mellon Foundation. And, you mentioned, HBCUs and jazz, and there's still a lot of work to be done there. But, the fact that there has been, some level of work in past years, comes, I'm just learning and discovering, even in hearing you speak. So thank you for that. For the HBCU Jazz Initiative, that's something that I just started working on. And similar to the Arts Administrators of Color Network that I referenced earlier, it largely grew out of a response to, a lot of the inequities, quite frankly, that have existed in the larger nonprofit sphere, that I know so many folks are so hard at work around, including, I can imagine, so many of the folks that are listening in right now. Out of more than 100 HBCUs in this country, less than 10 have robust jazz education programs. And, there are so many things that go into why that is. I would say largely it is because the nonprofit arts sector has contributed and provided a lot of funding and support towards what, a lot of us are framing as Western traditional music organizations or classical music organizations. To run an orchestra, it costs a lot of money, to put it lightly, and in order for there to really be a shift in the way that philanthropic dollars are spent more closely and directly to communities, it is my belief that there will have to be some substantial changes made to the way that nonprofits organize themselves and organize their dollars. So I did want to, just name that up frankly, to just pivot for a moment. The Arts Administrators of Color Network emerged, largely in response to those inequities. And I will say within its first year or two, we weren't being provided, support by philanthropic entities. The organization is led beautifully by a woman by the name of Quanice Floyd, who within the first year of starting the program was working 3 jobs. She was working as a full-time teacher in Maryland. She was working in hotels, late at night. She was working, to get her master's degree, her second master's at that time, while, providing professional development seminars and training spaces, and just places for people to connect and network through the AAC network. And so my role with her was to help provide, some of that support as we launched these, various programs. I will say in the past year, we've definitely gained more traction and energy and attention from folks, both within our own sphere and crowdfunding and internally resourcing our work, but then also, from folks in the philanthropic sphere. But I'll say, quite frankly, I think not only myself, but others on the board now would love to see, there no longer being a need for an AAC, right? Really, we want to see a field where there's equity of opportunity and dollars provided for organizations and less loopholes and less relationships that are necessary and less gatekeepers, essentially, for, initiatives to really spring forward in the best ways possible. So, as time moves on, I think, we're collectively working towards that, right? We want to see more diversity in this space. We want to see more funding provided in these various ways. One thing that I just do want to mention before, passing the baton on to Matt is a lot of this conversation also needs to be deeply rooted in music education and, how and where we're providing support there. And also, how those systems are organized. Are we only teaching band and orchestra and choir, or should we be expanding the curriculum for the youth that, are participating in them in order for them to fully develop themselves and fully develop knowledge around their own communities and also communities that exist throughout the country? There's a striking study that was conducted by the National Endowment for the Arts that we reference quite frequently through the Lewis Prize for Music. It's a finding that in 2008, Black and Latinx young folks who received any arts education dropped by nearly 50% between 1982 to 2008, and only 1% for white people. And that, I think, is what, in many ways has led to things like the lack of jazz education at HBCUs, as well as the need for opportunities like the Arts Administrators of Color Network to emerge. So as we work to a better future, I just hope that we continue to recognize that we're now seated in a position to really pass on a baton to the next generation and to galvanize leadership to continue this work that will take, again, substantial time, and clear leadership from emerging young folks. Tomorrow there's going to be a conversation with DeLuke Smith from the Lewis Prize, who will be discussing that specifically at 3:30. So I hope folks, kind of continue the conversation there as well.
Ariel, thank you. And thanks for bringing in music education and young people who are our future. We tend to spend a lot of airtime in this community. We're a small knit community here on the music industry, and it starts early. Those seeds are planted early. So I appreciate you bringing music education into the ecosystem that we're discussing here. Matt, Ariel, brings up crowdfunding and equity, and I love for you to share Black Fret's model. Because I consider it an emerging democratic form of philanthropy, even though I know you've been at it for several years now. In the legacy of philanthropy, it's young, right? So please tell us about that. And then please touch on the Black Lives Music Fund that launched this past week and what Black Fret is doing to rally behind that.
Absolutely. It would be an honor to talk about both. But first, Ariel, I wanted to just call out a couple of things you said. Number one, that the NEA study, how many times do we see studies like that, pop up? And everyone's like, oh, wow. And on the one hand, you're surprised, but on the other hand, you're totally not surprised because you knew it was happening. You knew that that funding was falling. You knew that the education was tailing off because you just see it. You remember how it was when you went to school, and then you see your kids going to school and it's different. And that gradualism, that erosion is something that I think even the topic that, you and Ella both touched on, the transparency in funding and the access to funding and the ability to identify the problem and get funding to that is something that I'd love to see all of us as those working in philanthropy work with, private corporations, funders, what have you, to kind of break down those walls. Too often it is an obscured process. It's, a dark curtain to walk through, and then another one to figure out how to get to this funding. I know it's aspirational and vague, but I would love to find ways for us to cut through those paths more clearly and define those paths for people so that they can see a way to success that's achievable, not one that's obscured where you do have to know someone or you do have to, what have you. I mean, hustle will always get you somewhere, but I would like intentional directional hustle, not like flailing, chaotic hustle. That's just, I just wanted to give appreciation for everything you just said. Black Fret tries to do that a little bit, but we do have artists come to us and say, hey, how do I become a Black Fret artist? And we give them an answer, but the answer is there is nothing to apply for. We've kind of flipped the script on funding here a little bit, and we did it through learned experience. The Black Fret model is based on membership. Those who believe that local music is art and that it deserves the support of the community pay annual dues to become a member of Black Fret. For the past 7 years, they've been $1,500 for you and a +1 to come to our events. In 2021, COVID gave us the time and breadth to look at that model. We're actually changing it to $750 per person to become a member of Black Fret. Becoming a member of Black Fret gives you the opportunity to nominate the bands that you love in any genre, in any form, as long as they're in the extraterritorial jurisdiction of a chapter. In Austin, that's 50 miles, a 50-mile radius from the state capital. In Seattle, it's a little bit different world. It's 75 miles actually to capture some of the cities where artists have had to go live to escape the high cost of living in these growing cities that used to be affordable and hotbeds of creativity. But you nominate the bands you love, you come to the events that we throw both private and public, and then at the end of the year, you vote for the allocation of the grant dollars. So the nominees that are selected at the beginning of the year by our members all receive a grant at the end of the year, either of a major amount or a minor amount. Last year in 2019, in the before times, we gave out $250,000 in Austin to 20 artists. We gave 10 $5,000 grants and 10 $20,000 grants. We hope to grow that number in both amount and quantity of grants given as our chapters grow and as our membership grows. And we hope to scale this model throughout the country. Seattle is our first chapter. By the end of next year, we hope to announce our next 2 chapters and continue to grow from there to really create a network of connected communities that are supporting their local music in ways that are specific to those cities. We have a model where we want our New Orleans chapter to feel and sound and taste and walk and talk like New Orleans. We want our LA chapter to be as LA can be. Detroit, Memphis, Nashville, Portland, whatever city it may be, they all have a local character and it all needs to be respected and elevated by the members who select these nominees. The last thing I'll mention about about our model is it's not just our members who select nominees each year. After you receive a Black Fret grant, all the musicians of the bands who received a grant get to nominate in perpetuity as long as that band continues making music. We have a wonderful panel of music industry advisors who provide mentoring to the artists, and they all get to nominate as well. Additionally, we use the Voice of the Public, our local wonderful public radio station, KUTX. Their listeners get to pick one of our nominees as well. We take the best new band from the Austin Music Awards that's put on by the Austin Chronicle. So we take a multitude of voices together. We're making real strides and efforts to make sure that diversity is more baked into our model. I feel very blessed to be surrounded by people in Austin who I've come to know and love, who reached out to us after George Floyd's murder and said, Black Fret can do things better. And we've listened. We're learning. We've got some future programs and ways we're going to make sure, for example, we elevate underrepresented genres within Black Fret. We've only had 2 jazz musicians in, well, 3, in the 133 bands that have gone through our program. We've had very limited hip hop and rap nominations. There is a vibrant scene in this town that is not connected. It's in a different silo, and a lot of our members can't see it. We need to break those walls down. To that end, one of the initiatives that we've helped launch is one by my friend Shaka Mahone, who is principal in a band Riders Against the Storm with his wife Key. Amazing band. He's the head of the music commission here in Austin right now, a community activist who has made sure to keep these issues front and center for years. And he came to me and asked for help launching what he's calling the Black Live Music Fund. And this is a fund that's going to be where with Black Fret, we're out and we're selecting musicians. This is going to be a fund that's going to support Black musicians, specifically with microgrants in its first phase, with educational assistance, and with support. As it grows, it's aspirationally going to create a hub of Black music in Austin to help make sure that people can break these silos down and discover music that is right in front of our face, but we can't see it because the curtains are there and the walls are there in our society. So we're bound and determined to help break down those walls in any way we can. I'm proud to have helped through the generosity of Black Fret members fund the first $10,000 of the Black Live Music Fund. And I encourage anyone to go check that out and to continue to strive to reach equity and know that we can all do it on the highest of roads.
Yeah, so Matt, I would say you're a new friend and you're a fast friend, right?
Yes, truth.
I moved into Austin permanently in the fall, and I started to turn over rocks to see, you know, who's there in the music community. And I joined Black Fret, and I immediately started very forcefully in Stacie Freasier's way to say, where are the Black people? Where's the hip hop? Where are all these things, right? And he, with humility and openness, was like, I'm thinking about it and I'm listening and I welcome everything you're saying to me. And I was brand new and this just happened. So Matt, thank you and keep doing it. I love your approach. You're definitely part of the solution. In some of the planning conversations for this panel, I wanted to have a community foundation representative on this panel because that is yet another philanthropic vehicle that plays a key role in this whole philanthropic landscape. Although we don't have someone who is in-house at a community foundation right now, you, Matt, shared that Austin Community Foundation played a role, an incubation role, and then that trickles on to the Black Lives Music Fund. So can you just illustrate that for us for a second and give folks some ideas about how community foundations play into this?
Yeah, I really think that community foundations play a role in what I was talking about earlier in response to what Ella was saying, and that they are guideposts. They're your Sherpa to achieving results. There are lots of hurdles in starting a nonprofit or realizing a dream, and community foundations play a huge role in enabling all of this. I'm proud to be one of the founding board members of my first nonprofit, the Austin Community Foundation, whose mission was to provide business education to musicians to create a sustainable middle class of artists. That organization is still going strong here in Austin, and the Austin Community Foundation incubated that organization, allowed us to launch under their 501c3. Subsequently, Black Fret incubated under the Austin Community Foundation 501c3 until we were able to establish our own. So, you know, it was like little baby cactuses growing along the way. A Texas reference for you. I know the Black Live Music Fund is also incubating under the Austin Community Foundation. And additionally, community foundations have an opportunity to mobilize. They've got gravity, they're broad, they're deep when they're successful, in my opinion. And when COVID hit, the Austin Community Foundation was able to become a catalyst to raise hundreds of thousands of dollars for programs, for relief for artists. Black Fret was the beneficiary of a $50,000 grant from the Stand With Austin Fund, which was formed under the Austin Community Foundation, that we used to launch a jobs program, something brand new that we had never done before. These are for happy hour concerts. You can actually still get them now. For anyone on a company, you can go to blackfret.org/happy hour concert, pay $500, get 3 musicians, one of whom is going to be female, one of whom will be of color, for wonderful diversity and really messed up lineups and genres, but you're gonna get a 3-band song swap and an MC for an hour, hour and a half for your organization. We pay the artists out of that fund. Everyone on the call tips the artists. We consolidate those tips, distribute them evenly at the end of the week. And on the strength of that model, we turn that $50,000 into $156,000 and counting. So we continue to amplify that and be beneficiaries of the incredible work that the Austin Community Foundation is doing. And I'm proud that I'm a neighbor and they live, a block and a half away from me. So yeah.
That's cool. Ariel, Ella, do you want to pick up on anything that Matt shared? Should we go in a slightly different direction? Good? Good. All right. So something that I want to explore myself and be able to mentally map this out is the right balance of focus between local, regional, state, and national music communities and the philanthropies and funders in those. How do you see, from your vantage point, these different circles? I think, Ella, you described that as in planning. How do they relate and how can they work in concert moving forward? Where should the focus be? Where is the focus?
Well,
let's whack.
I think from a funder perspective, and only from a funder that sees thousands of proposals and projects happening out in the field, I think the less redundancy, the better. Many organizations appear to be, they may not be, but they appear to be very duplicative. And that's something that for people who are outside that particular circuit is very difficult for them to sort out. Funders, as we know, tend to really like coalitions and cohort building. So I think that is probably very, appealing in terms of, getting their focus on you. And I think as least bureaucratic as organizations can be, whether it's network to network or however that interface is between, say, local, regional, national, and so on, the least bureaucratic way is the best. There are so many overlaps and inefficiencies, and I think people feel that on the non-foundation side too, or on, everyone feels, at least what I hear from my colleagues, a little bit overwhelmed with the amount of networking. It's great. It takes time. It takes a lot of attention, and you need to feel like your action, your activism is meaningful and that it's having some kind of effect. I'll say something maybe later about respect for the local and why I think that that's so important in all of this. I don't want to discount, the importance of global and national and regional movements and structures, but sometimes the bigger the tent, the more diluted or accommodating the message. So I think it's real important, absolutely, to network and cohort build and ally seek, and otherwise, intersect as much as possible, of course, but also avoid redundant infrastructure and bureaucracy.
Yeah, Ella, how does that bureaucracy that you're suggesting we avoid, how does that manifest itself? Give me some tangible ways that bureaucracy looks like and what you're talking about.
Well, since I was talking about the Mellon Foundation before, I'm going to have to say something about that, because just the process of applying for a grant, and I think things are changing there, and they're changing in many other foundations too. But it was an onerous process for both the staff and for those people who, admittedly, were very fortunate to be able to get a grant. Yes, but I found it to be, ridiculous. And God, I'll never work again in this town, will I? But, people don't have time, they're working with such limited resources. And so we have to make it clean and clear. And when people talk about transparency, it's not necessarily that anybody's trying to hide anything. It's just that everything is so mucked up in generations of ideas and practices and so on. So there are some foundations that are very straightforward about their application process. They help you through it and so on. And I think that really helps, just unclog the system, and it's humane and it's common sense. And, so what's all of this, ridiculousness about? So that's one thing I would say.
That's a great example. We only have 3 minutes left, and the second part is right after this is going into government and arts council forms of philanthropy. So that's going to resonate, in this next conversation, I'm sure. Ariel, what's on your heart and mind right now? Take 2 minutes to say whatever you want to about all this.
Oh gosh, there's just so much to say. I'll say if anyone wants to continue the conversation, feel free to reach out to me anytime. I'll drop my email address in the chat. I think ultimately more of these kind of conversations need to happen. If there's anything that I'm grateful for in 2020, it's that so many more networks and connections have been made in these ways. And I think they're overdue. So I'm just grateful to be a part of the conversation and look forward to continuing to build and strategize.
Yeah, thank you. Matt, any parting blessings or words of inspiration for this community that's listening?
I want everyone here to feel empowered. I want everyone here to feel as if we can make the pie bigger. We don't have to slice it into smaller pieces, and working together, we're going to be able to do that. And I think we're going to surprise ourselves. I think a lot of goodness is being bottled up now in COVID, and it's about to all come springing out. So we all need to work hard. We all need to connect. I know I'm going to continue connecting with Ariel and Ella, and I'm just again overjoyed to have been a part of this and to be a part of this music community and these wonderful people trying to do great things. So thank you very much. Yeah,
thank you. And we're building it right now. I mean, this is happening right now. Michael, I see we owe a debt of gratitude to you for putting this on. I know you put sweat equity into making this happen. So thanks for giving the space for this conversation to take place. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. And thanks to Ariel and Ella and Matt, and just a really, really thoughtful conversation. I really appreciate it. And I thank you for putting your contact information in the chat, and everybody I know is looking forward to following up and continuing these conversations. So.